Window shopping. The activity of looking through displayed goods in a shop window, especially without intending to buy anything. It's something that many of us do in our day-to-day lives, but we don't really think about, especially when it comes to our local charity shops. People will walk into the closest Oxfam or Bernardo's without much of a thought. But there is so much more to these old charity shops, which is why in this podcast I recorded a couple of stories from people who were willing to share them about their local charity shops and shed some light. My intent for this podcast is to change the opinion that these places aren't just old dusty charity shops, but can be so much more. And they can be things that people hold very dear to their heart. You know, before I started working in hospitality, I actually worked in a charity shop. I'm serious. I needed to get some more work experience from my CV, so I went looking around for jobs or just volunteer work. I think I started off volunteering at a library. Yeah. No, it was fun. The people were nice. But eventually I grew bored. Not much to do with a library. So I went back looking and ended up getting a retail job at a charity shop. This time with pay. It sat right in the middle of my old town shopping centre. So it was always busy. Like, always busy. I could barely get a break during my shift. I would sit down for a minute or two before my manager or a co-worker would be calling my name to help on the shop floor. Yeah, things were pretty busy there. You wouldn't expect it from a charity shop, but surprisingly it was. I think it had to do with the fact we were in a shopping centre, to be honest. But yeah, I worked there for about a year until I started looking for more full-time work and ended up getting a waitress job in central London. Working at a charity shop was surprisingly fun, though it could be quite exhausting with the amount of customers that were coming in. We had a little bell that would ring each time the front door opened, and it happened a lot during my shift. I will be the first to admit, I hated that bell. I might sound a little dramatic, but I think I have some sort of adverse reaction when I hear a bell. Like, it doesn't matter what type, but I would hear it and my body would tense up just for a split second. Like, it was like a warning that my day could be potentially ruined by whoever walked through that door. We would get a lot of shitty customers there. I mean, you always get bad customers in retail, but there was something about that job that just brought out the worst in people. Like, they felt entitled to be rude to me just because they decided to spend £5 there rather than Primark or any other store. People like that don't deserve to be given special treatment. especially when they're harassing staff members. Not all of the customers were bad though. There were a lot of regulars that were nice enough. There was this teen girl who was in the midst of her goth phase, so she went looking for anything black. Also an older couple that came every so often. And this one woman and her daughter came every other Saturday. Those were a few of my preferred customers. After about a year, I handed in my 2-week notice. All of my regulars soon found out that I was leaving, and one by one, they wished me well during my last few shifts, telling me that whatever I do in life, I'll be great at it. It was a sweet end to that part of my life, though I was annoyed by some customers. I actually really liked working there, and it's something I don't regret doing. Not one bit.
I never really liked shopping as a kid. Well, it's not a surprise since most kids don't really like shopping and find it boring, but there was always one place I enjoyed. I was about 5-year-old when my grandparents took me to a charity shop for the first time. It was a little British Heart Foundation that just opened up in the high street. My grandparents were all Jewish immigrants, so naturally, they wanted to have a look for any deals, and little me was dragged along in the process. Being a 5-year-old who considered shopping to be girly, I didn't want to go at all, and would rather spend my time watching CITV than standing around in some shop. But I couldn't stay home by myself, so I had to leave, much to my dismay, of course. The journey there wasn't long, about a 15-minute walk. It felt like hours, and my granda had to pick me up because my feet were hurting. Eventually, we made it to the shop. And when I saw those red walls and the large red windows, I actually became interested. The shops I went to before were boring, and mostly sold items that kids my age wouldn't be interested in. This British Heart Foundation was brightly coloured and had all sorts on its shelves, from ornaments to clothes, and even a whole shelf dedicated to toys. Everything was also arranged in a neat little rows and organised to look as nice as possible. The shop was quite busy on that day, so I had to stay near my grandparents, but we spent a while there just browsing, leaving with a couple of clothes for my gran and a stuffed animal for me. It was nice that day. We went into that shop many more times after that day. I can't tell you how many hours or how much money we spent there. It was relatively cheap, so my grandparents always were there, looking for any deals on clothes, toys, VHS tapes, or whatever we could afford. My grandparents are both dead now, and they have been for a while, but that little British Heart Foundation is still on that high street, practically glowing in its red glory. It's weird to think about, but that building has outlived my grandparents. I wonder how many people it has and is going to outlive. The shop doesn't seem to be going anywhere since after all this time it's still standing and quite popular. I hope it doesn't close down anytime soon though. This might sound weird, but knowing that little British Heart Foundation is still standing makes me smile. It feels like a part of my grandparents are still here.
collecting dolls, specifically porcelain and rag dolls. It's not the weirdest collection to have. I've met a lot of people who have collected weirder things, like those rubber ducks you put in the bath, or road signs that have fallen off their signpost. But there's something about dolls that creeps people out. I think it's because they almost look human, but there is something about their expression and those beady little eyes that are just enough to make them not real. There's a word for that. The uncanny valley. It's where our brains are able to identify something that doesn't look quite human, and it kicks our minds into feeling unnerved and scared when looking at it. I think that's why so many people are scared of dolls. Anyways, it's quite hard finding dolls that aren't incredibly expensive. Seriously, I've looked online and porcelain dolls just regularly go up for 50 quid more. So when I started my collection, I was obviously looking for alternatives. The ones that are cheaper tend to be broken or cracked, or just completely worn down and not taken care of. So I looked through a lot of shops, and I ended up finding that the best place for dolls are charity shops, just 100%. Seriously, I went in one time and there was 5, and I couldn't afford all of them. I really wanted to get all of them because they were gorgeous and well kept, but I ended up getting 2, and they were actually one of my earliest dolls in my collection. It's a really good place to go to charity shops and get dolls from, because they tend to be very good quality but also really cheap. And when you're doing a collection, it can be quite hard to maintain it because it feels like everything is trying to upsell you and give you the most expensive option, especially when it comes to like porcelain dolls, because everything's always like, oh, first edition or mint condition, or you know, this was like handmade and hand printed into the 1920s and it's been preserved all this time. So I don't know, it's good. I think charity shops in general are just a really good place in getting deals from. Like, I can't afford to get any high-end clothes, you know, from a really expensive clothing brand, so I've gone to a lot of charity shops and I get some really nice outfits there. Yeah, I think the high street wouldn't be the same without charity shops, because they're a very underrated part of the high street. It's always really fun to look into. It's weird to think about if they weren't there at all. It feels like the high street would be empty and incomplete. Yeah. Incomplete. I think that's the best way to put it.